Francisco was in his pajamas, in the middle of the day, in the middle of the street. I'd chosen the appropriate evening wear before logging Francisco out in his apartment, but he had apparently suffered a bout of sleepwalking and was not even equipped with shoes. I abandoned a potential friendship opportunity to seek decency and was discouraged by a neighbor in front of Francisco's building. A man who seemed uninterested in allowing the natural flow of time and events to unfold at a rate I would have preferred, and who was somewhat indiscriminate regarding where he kept his ammunition. This inconvenience forced Francisco into the alleyway behind his building where he would look for an alternate entrance. Living a peaceful life on the whole can be inconvenient, seeing as the inclination to impose one's own terms to gain control was perceptually easier than permitting the narrative of life to unfold on its own. But I would continue to adhere to my peaceful principles, dissonance itself my objective opponent. After picking out the clothing that would best transcend Francisco's bullet wounds, I took him back to the office, following the traffic laws most of the way there. At first, it was an exhausting practice. Some of the lights seemed not timed for the flow of traffic, but I decided to continue on my established thought experiment of the traffic quandary. If my previous assertion that my intention supported with action was the request for a future, by shirking the order I was familiar with, regardless of who it affected, I was changing the rate at which I would arrive at my destination, and consequently the timings of all future interactions. My intention continuing to dictate who I was, who Francisco was, I somewhat stupidly remained at the traffic lights throughout their duration, intending not conformity out of fear for breaking the law, but for obeying the nature of Francisco's reality from which there was no apparent escape. Not forgetting the grand plan of accumulating enough profit to purchase a luxury yacht for everyone to share, I set to work right away, purchasing a warehouse and some goods to fill it. From the business management website, crates of alcohol and tobacco were the only options given to Francisco to start, and seeking the best price point, I purchased 3 crates, hoping to maximize the risk and subsequently advance this business venture as profitably as possible. The crates, when purchased, would appear in the game world, and I was told to immediately go out and pick them up. Following the traffic lights on a mission like this was even more exhausting and resulted in 2 deaths along the way. But Francisco's motorcycle was preserved, and the net cost of the 2 deaths would be relatively low compared to the price of the business transaction that was taking place. The aspiration to follow the nature of reality uninterrupted, unlike the physical continuity of Francisco. The crates were stowed in a relatively impressive, safari vehicle, and upon entering it, I was told that everyone in the game world would know of its location. If they were anything like the denizens who had traded bullets for inconvenience on my way to pick up the trade goods, it would be unlikely that they were going to be any less aggressive en route. But I resolved to follow the rules regardless, steadfast in my peaceful principle. The beginning of the journey was actually relatively quiet in the city safari vehicle. I made sure to stay within the lanes and focus on the other drivers, although at one point a car refused to move through the street. Assuming the driver was distracted or otherwise busy, I moved past the stopped vehicle into the intersection, accidentally colliding with a motorcyclist who I made sure to apologize to. Halfway through the journey, Kabuni pulled up in a vest beside the van, honking his horn to get Francisco's attention. I'd forgotten I'd changed some of the interface settings, and as I was trying to find the key for the horn, the city safari vehicle took its shot at the sky. Apparently another player had a different idea for how this mission should transpire, using explosives to flip Francisco, crates and all. I had a contingency about following the traffic laws, and that was to do so faithfully until their purpose had failed, to keep people safe. As a participant in the game, and apparently in business, I was a target of value that could be stripped by others according to their own desires, putting bystanders at risk. I didn't know Josh 7373's actual intention, but he had tried to kill Francisco, and I felt an obligation for his self-preservation and to distance his body from innocent bystanders. I decided to proceed to my destination to decrease Francisco's accessible value and complete the first leg of this business transaction. I was under the impression that I could have hired someone to run this phase of the mission for me, but I wanted to make sure the peace concept was represented properly in this first foray into the corporate world, as well as not wanting to ask others to do a task I wasn't willing to complete myself. That included not firing back, and in this case turning the other window and completing the mission. I was given the opportunity to select between 1, 2, or 3 crates to sell. Not knowing how risky the actual exchange of merchandise would be, I chose the option to sell only 1 crate and was instructed to pick up a plane from the airport.
Okay, sales on. You need to move it by air. Cargo's all loaded on a plane at LSIA. Just take
How exactly the crates moved from the van to the airplane was not important enough of a question when it came to moving my bottom line closer to my goal, an estimated profit of $4,000 for this exchange. Takeoff was easy enough and the flight was only a few minutes between airports, but landing came with a surprise. That in order to complete the exchange I would have to, quote, take out the enemies. 10 men suddenly appeared and now began firing at Francisco, who was not allowed to re-enter the plane and who now needed to engage in combat, which I of course immediately fled. I was given 20 minutes to defeat the rather impolite antagonists, during which time I had my motorcycle delivered and 8 chocolate bars to replenish Francisco's health. I would drive the motorcycle across the bridge, my half-baked idea to lure them onto the tracks and allow for them to suffer the consequences of their bloodlust frenzy. I would get lost and parachute off into the water below and wander about waiting for the countdown timer to end. They weren't driven as strongly as I had hoped or as cohesively as I'd imagined, and the plan fell through. They had won their game and stolen Francisco's $10,000. Still aggressive, the antagonists would attack Francisco with no purpose, but more disappointingly had turned this endeavor into a dead end. I tried to recover the plane but was not permitted entry and disappointingly headed back to Francisco's apartment, stopping first at the darts game that was marked along the way. I'll, of course, admit I wasn't all that surprised. Conflict was a natural part of business, and violence a natural part of conflict, especially in Francisco's world. This game of darts was a good release of frustration and a good escape from Francisco's perils, but even this minigame had its own rules, and I had forgotten the last hit had to be on a double point section of the board. This failure, if you wanted to call it that, was my fault in a lot of ways. No one was asking me to build a $6 to $7 million surplus so I could buy a party boat I wouldn't truly be able to protect. And no one said I had to do it within an accelerated amount of time, by acquiring and turning over trade goods to build revenues as quickly as possible. No one said starting a business would be easy or even possible, while also adhering to idealistic principles, and it seemed that every possible obstacle would find its way toward Francisco on this task I forced upon him, before we even got to the challenge itself. He, however, seemed relentlessly optimistic, and as much as I wanted to blame myself or something, or find a definitive and final answer to the various questions and conjectures I was making, we both simply continued to persist. We essentially were those idealistic principles manifest, and this failure, which I simply can't call it that, was just another cable holding up the bridge between the concept of peace and Francisco's reality. And speaking of Francisco's reality, I really wasn't sure what to make of his sleepwalking, or whatever he did when I wasn't there to guide him. I was weary of his unconscious mobility, even though it seemed to be working out for him, attracting friends and celebrating pajamas in a way that I wasn't brave enough to do myself. I truly wasn't sure what was going to happen next, and honestly having a steadfast plan seemed to get in the way of opportunity, so I tried to pick something a little more warm to prepare him for the next time he woke up.